Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario, and online experiences to anyone in this mortal realm. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and it is my privilege to be your haunted host for this episode. The minutes are slowly ticking closer to midnight. The night is dark, the weather calm, and everything is silent. Daytime creatures are deep in their slumber, while the nocturnal ones quietly creep about. A crescent moon appears and disappears as the clouds swim past. Cold is descending upon the landscape as all the living things prepare for a winter sleep. The only break in this peaceful scene is a car with 4 people parked near an old power station. They swap stories and share a few laughs. A rather ordinary scene for a Wednesday night in a small town in 1966. Few could predict that that night would ignite one of the most enduring legends that has circled the globe: the appearance of a horrifying winged figure that foretells of mass tragedies. In this piece of folklore from the hills of West Virginia, the figure is named Mothman, but it has many other names and origin stories. It's part of a long line of mythical creatures that haunt our hometowns, stoking overactive imaginations and fueling cautionary tales across time and place. The Mothman of Point Pleasant is not alone. Nightmarish creatures like this are everywhere. In this 2-part series, we'll explore dark folklore from around the world, where fantasy mingles with reality with terrifying results. We focus our attention on creatures, some alarmingly human, others classified as cryptids, a few that escape any kind of definition, and some best described as shapeshifters. In today's episode, we'll look at creatures connected with mortality, those who foretell death, or more alarmingly, take death into their own hands. They're all creatures we're warned to stay away from, lest something terrible might happen to us. But as we'll learn, sometimes even the most cautious people can escape the deadly grasp of mythical creatures. But before we get to that, we have 3 of our most immersive ghost tours restarting over the next few weekends. In Ottawa, the Haunted Museum Tour, featuring the Bytown Museum, the oldest and most haunted building in the city, returns this weekend with several brand new stories to share. Next weekend, our ghost tour of Ottawa's historic Beechwood Cemetery, Tales from the Mausoleum, launches for the 2024 season. It is one of the most powerful and unique experiences we offer, and it's just really neat to be able to walk amongst the tombstones at night. For the May long weekend, our must-do Ghosts of Fort Henry begins haunting Kingston, Ontario for the season. If you think exploring a famously haunted fortress at night sounds like your idea of a good time, then you need to join us at a site that confounded the ghost hunters. For information on these 3 ghost tours, as well as all of our paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, please visit our website, hauntedwalk.com. And don't forget, as a Haunted Talks listener, you can save 15% on your tickets by using the promo code Haunted Talks, all one word, at checkout. We'd also love to connect with you on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Haunted Walk. And please follow, rate, and review the show wherever you listen so we can see signs of your ghostly presence. As we delve deeper into the realm of folklore, it's important to remember the cultural significance of these tales. For many people, these stories connect with their spirituality and local beliefs, and therefore are taken very seriously. They explain strange phenomena, have been told by elders or shaman, connect with origin stories for cultures around the world, and may even be considered deities. Accordingly, we will be exploring the more sinister side of folklore today with the utmost respect for their cultural origins. We encourage listeners to engage with these stories as they would with other horror tales, while keeping in mind and respecting their cultural importance. It's not surprising that so much folklore around the world is preoccupied with death. It's one of life's greatest mysteries, after all, and the reason why so many paranormal researchers study phenomena like ghosts. Being able to predict when one dies is a terrifying power shared by many different creatures. But one of the most famous is undoubtedly the Banshee. For many today, the term Banshee is probably most known for the common phrase, "screamed like a banshee." This folkloric tale originates in Ireland, with a long and very storied history connected and intermingled with both Celts and Christians. The Banshee is a woman who emits a horrific noise that foretells the death of a close friend or family member. In some versions of the story, the Banshee isn't seen, just heard. Her telling scream is all that's required to terrify family members and make them wonder who amongst them will soon meet their end. For those that do see a Banshee, they describe her in many different ways. She often appears as a young woman with very long and flowing hair, and is sometimes cloaked in a shroud. Others see an elderly woman draped in veils, occasionally with glowing red eyes. But perhaps the most terrifying version is that of a headless woman who appears with a bowl of blood. However she may look, the Banshee releases the same terrifying and blood-curdling scream that would send even the most hardened Irish person running in the opposite direction. But seeing or hearing a Banshee doesn't necessarily foretell anything terrible for you. It's your family members and close friends that you need to be worried about. Before you get too scared about Banshees coming for your friends and family, though, remember, Banshees don't cause death. It's said that Banshees act as a type of messenger or omen, warning that death is imminent. They are able to read into the fates of individuals and warn people ahead of time so they can prepare and be ready for their end. That's why, for some, Banshees are seen as a form of protector, a creature that may assist their dying loved ones in their final moments. For those of you who know the Mothman legend, which we teased at the beginning of the episode, the description of the Banshee might seem familiar. A mysterious creature that may have glowing eyes, makes a terrifying sound, and foretells death. Indeed, the Mothman of West Virginia does bear a striking resemblance to the Banshee and other creatures that seem to know exactly when death is about to occur. For many of us, our introduction to the Mothman was thanks to the Richard Gere movie, The Mothman Prophecies, which came out in 2002. It was based very closely on a book of the same name published in 1975, which analyzed a collection of occurrences in a small West Virginia town in the late 1960s. The movie is set in current-day 2002 and unfolds as if the Mothman events are happening in real time. For anyone terrified of the movie, it might not help to learn that it was closely based on real events, simply from a different time period. Of course, some cinematic liberties were taken with characters and details and the sequence of events, but ultimately, the principal storyline of the Mothman Prophecies movie was very real. To recap, the 1975 book and historical newspaper accounts at the time documented that numerous townspeople reported seeing a strange creature and noted odd occurrences throughout late 1966 and early 1967. There was the weird incident in the car related earlier, where two couples saw a strange being in the headlights of their car. They described it as tall, almost the size of a grown man, with wings and glowing red eyes. The couples were absolutely certain of what they had seen and stood by their statements. A few weeks earlier, a man's dog had mysteriously gone missing. According to the owner, the dog bolted for the woods after seeing two glowing red eyes in the distance. The owner followed the dog's tracks on the ground, where it appeared to circle around an invisible entity, but then just seemed to vanish. By all accounts, the dog was never found. The Mothman Prophecies book documented other strange things townspeople noticed, although some have criticized those tales as simply being linked to good hindsight. The climactic moment in this tale is the tragic collapse of the Silver Bridge in December of 1967, which killed 46 people. The cause of the bridge failure was identified as fatigue and stressed joints that weren't properly maintained. But locals were desperately looking for deeper explanations in a small town where everyone knew the victims. Immediately after the collapse, no one made a connection between the strange occurrences over the past year, that winged figure with the red eyes, and the tragic accident. It wasn't until John Keel started an investigation. He was a journalist who was very well known for his interest in the mysterious and the unexplained, particularly UFOs, arrived in West Virginia and began to look into the collapse. As all good booksellers do, Keel exaggerated his story a bit and published it with the benefit of hindsight. For many, it was simply part of a genre of wild speculation about the unknown, produced by a journalist known for his questionable research techniques. But for others, in West Virginia, the story stuck. It is undeniable that people did see a strange winged creature with glowing eyes, and then suddenly, a major tragedy occurred. As far as anyone knows, the creature has never been spotted again in Point Pleasant. So for some, the Mothman was a predictor of a tragedy and a very sad omen. Others analyzing the story have pointed out the long history of folklore in the Appalachian region, especially in small towns surrounded by mysterious dark woods. For those familiar with the landscape, the idea of such a dark and foreboding tale taking hold makes complete sense, as it is the ideal breeding ground for such a story. Whether people in Point Pleasant and beyond believe these tales isn't really the point. Instead, it's a question of how and why such tales become embedded in our culture. As we wonder that, we don't have to look too far for almost identical examples. One of the most fascinating parts of studying folklore is seeing how many similar stories you can find from around the world. The Mothman is a perfect example. I'm sure we can all name ancient and contemporary myths about human-like creatures with huge wings that are associated with death. It sounds like the harpies from ancient Greece, or angels from Christianity, or large birds like crows, ravens, or owls who figure in death mythology all over the world. All of the creatures we've mentioned so far may give you quite a fright, as you're left wondering if death is afoot. But most of them don't seem to cause any untimely ends themselves. They're simply omens of impending doom, or perhaps a spirit doing someone else's bidding. So what about those mythical creatures that we're taught to fear because they may lead you to your own fateful end? The alluring spirits that somehow trick us to follow them into the unknown. For some, these are simply fictional tales for children, warning them to stay away from hazards like open water or dark forests. But for others, these creatures are far more sinister and may point to evil spirits walking among us that are intent on causing us harm. The popo bawa, which roughly translates to batwing in Swahili, is a creature associated with death and evil. Like the Mothman, it appears to have a long history and is similar to many evil spirits in the southeastern regions of Africa. But the story itself is quite contemporary. The first recording sightings and naming of the creature didn't occur until the 1960s. The description is remarkably similar to the Mothman, a human-sized creature with massive wings, described as bat-like in appearance with horrifying eyes and a putrid smell. But unlike the Mothman, the popo bawa isn't simply a bad omen who predicts death. For many, the popo bawa is actually an evil spirit who causes pain and suffering. This may be physical assaults, or, perhaps more terrifying, demonic possession. Denying the existence of the creature or not reporting the incidents is said to only further attract the evil spirit. This feature of the folklore led to a mass hysteria throughout Zanzibar in 1995. The exact cause of the panic is unclear, although some have linked it to political and social instability. But the effects of the supposed popo bawa attacks were very real. People who have reported encounters describe frightening apparitions, often preceded by an unpleasant smell. While under the influence of this spirit, they experienced a state of lucid wakefulness, but were unable to move their limbs, a phenomenon akin to sleep paralysis combined with an out-of-body experience. According to these accounts, the harm inflicted by popo bawa varied from suffocation to sexual assaults on both men and women. While no further hysterias have been reported since the 90s, the folklore endures with Swahili speakers who continue to pass on the cautionary tale. One of the most well-known and widely circulated tales of creatures wanting to harm us are sirens. Originating in ancient Greece, sirens are known for their alluring and sweet voices that tempt sailors or those traveling by sea. The songs are so irresistible that even perfectly rational men have been lured to the water's edge in almost a trance-like state. Once close enough, sirens either compel humans to enter the water or forcibly pull them under, dragging people to the dark depths where they eventually drown. In some tellings, the sirens are human-like creatures with mythical features like wings or claws. In other tellings, they are beautiful women with soft faces and long hair. But their intention is always the same: to draw you closer and closer and closer until you can't escape. The ancient Greek concept of a siren was picked up by other cultures around the world throughout the centuries, particularly those that frequently traveled by sea. Sailors were warned about the sweet sound of women's voices when in the middle of the ocean and urged to stay away from any maidens that appear near the water's edge, in case they are beautiful sirens luring them to their dark demise. In some European cultures, this concept of a sea seductress took on a new name: mermaids. That's right, that harmless Disney-like image you probably have in your mind right now is based upon a much darker siren myth. Properly sanitized for children's movies and toys, the Disney-like mermaid does have an alluring voice, but I don't think they intend on pulling unsuspecting sailors underwater to their deaths. Historical mermaids were frequently drawn in the margins of maps and told in seafaring tales the world over, leading us to wonder if these fantastical myths are based on some version of the truth. Surely, something or someone must have been compelling sailors to throw themselves overboard in search of sweet, soft, yet deadly comfort. The idea of mythical creatures pulling people underwater isn't confined to sirens and mermaids. In fact, this theme is one of the most pervasive in mythology around the world, albeit in slightly different forms. Consider the Kelpie, a staple of Scottish mythology. The Kelpie is a type of ancient horse that is said to haunt the banks of inland lochs, which are deep and cold lakes that dot the highlands of Scotland. Nearly every loch in Scotland has their own version of the Kelpie and plenty of lore to go along with it. The innocent-looking and docile horse is often spotted on the shores, its calm demeanor immediately appealing to children who often rush to pet the pony. But before they know what is happening, the child's little hands get tangled in the mane, or they feel compelled to mount the horse. Either way, they are doomed. Once in the grasp of the Kelpie, the children are quickly dragged into the water and never heard from again. If you're thinking that there's no chance you would ever pet a random horse on the lakeshore, you should also be aware that Kelpies can shapeshift. They are one of the many mythical creatures that change their form to better approach individual victims. They are known to take the appearance of a fair maiden, and similar to a siren, compel young men to come closer to the water's edge before they are aggressively snatched away. Kelpies have also been known to appear as hairy humans, ready to entangle curious onlookers that get too close. Are you starting to notice that many of these tales feature a compelling woman that is said to allure people to their ultimate end? Well, that does seem to be a common feature of the stories and very prominent narrative, even away from the water's edge. Take La Ciguapa, one of the most well-known mythological creatures of the Caribbean, said to inhabit the mountains of the Dominican Republic. La Ciguapa is a human-like creature with backwards feet, making their movements erratic and hard to predict. Although they are technically a shapeshifter, they most commonly appear as a beautiful woman. Their feminine allure, including long dark hair, is part of their arsenal for luring young men. Or that's one version of the tale. Like a siren or a kelpie, in this version, they are intent on doing harm, not allowing their victims to escape unscathed. In other versions, La Ciguapa is more benevolent, a creature to avoid, but one that doesn't intend to cause destruction, simply preferring solitude. She seeks out the mountains as a place of refuge, sticking close to nature and away from modernity. Either way, she has been seen in the mountains of the Dominican Republic and seems intent on staying hidden there. As we mentioned earlier, a lot of these tales do sound like cautionary stories for instructing children, warnings to stay close to home, away from the water's edge. They make for excellent campfire stories, folklore told amongst friends and family members to keep people close. But some of these stories stand out and are far more terrifying than others. It appears there are plenty of spirits intent on causing harm and pulling any and all victims into their grasp, whatever it takes. In Canada's far north, Inuit culture tells of a creature called the Kalupiluit that doesn't have a consistent or preferred physical form. It's been described as a human-like, monster-like, serpent-like, whale-like creature. But it's not what the creature looks like that's so incredibly terrifying for children. It's what Kalupiluit does to its unsuspecting victims. Like the tales of the siren, it is said to emit a quiet but alluring noise that is only audible to children. The sound draws them closer to the edge of the ice floe and may even compel them to gaze into the open water. Suddenly, the creature emerges from the depths and snatches the child, pulling them under the water to either devour them immediately or put them in a stasis-like state for their young to eat later. A truly horrifying tale. But perhaps the most terrifying part of this story is that humans have attempted to defeat Kalupiluit, but no matter what they do, these creatures cannot be destroyed. In fact, acts of attempted destruction only make them stronger, which means the only defense against attack is avoidance. Staying away from the water and hoping you don't encounter one is your only hope. Hope is also one of the only things you have to defend yourself against our final mythological creature, La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman. Originating in Mexico, the story has many variations in Latin American cultures. From Guatemala to Panama to the US, every community has their own unique version that is regionally specific. In our virtual Haunted Campfire series, we had a storyteller from New Mexico tell us the local version there. But the basics of this story are relatively the same. A young mother, fueled by some kind of jealous rage, or betrayal, or sorrow, makes the fateful decision to drown her sons before entering the water herself. Her cruel act instigates a curse, whereby she is forced to stalk the riverbanks for the rest of her immortal days, wailing and crying out with sounds of sheer terror, lamenting the loss of her boys. Like the Banshee we heard about earlier, simply hearing La Llorona's cry is a signal of grave misfortune. Anyone within earshot of the blood-curdling wail is said to face imminent suffering. But unlike the Banshee, La Llorona is not a kind spirit that some families consider a protector. In fact, she's seen as a bringer of death and an evil entity. For those who are unlucky enough to come upon her, their fate is already sealed. Few are able to get away from her grasp, adults and children alike. If you do manage to escape, you're cursed with knowing that she will either come back for you, or she has already left her mark, and you're doomed forevermore. There are countless tales of people going mad, haunted by the image and sound of La Llorona as she seeks them out, looking high and low, until finally, she finds you. You may think it's easier just to give in to her initial wail without a fight, but your end wouldn't be so pleasant either. She is known to lure children, and thinking that her own ill-fated sons manically drowns them in nearby rivers. Begging and pleading with the spirit has no effect, as she is without any mercy and shows zero compassion for her victims. The popular story of La Llorona is told in its very many versions throughout Latin American culture, both as a scary story to frighten children and as an important tale of mortality and human emotion. Her maternal appearance is remarkably similar to both Aztec deities and Catholic saints. It makes La Llorona the perfect evil counterpart to the good and faithful mother in spiritual tales. While her own demise is a cautionary tale of what jealousy and human emotion can do, her story is also looked upon with immense sorrow. Whether you have pity for the young mother or not, her merciless quest to cause human suffering makes her the most terrifying mythical creature we have featured so far. Join us in our next episode as we continue our exploration of some of the darkest folklore from around the world. In the next episode, we will be dipping our toes into more beast-like creatures in myths that explain one of the most common sleep phenomena. Thank you so much for joining us for Part 1. For information on our Haunted Museum tour, Tales from the Mausoleum at Beechwood Cemetery, Ghosts of Fort Henry, or any of our paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, or Toronto, please visit our website, hauntedwalk.com, and be sure to use the promo code HauntedTalks at checkout to get 15% off your tickets. As always, a special thanks to our hardworking Haunted Talks team, including Brittany Buss, who researched and wrote this episode, and Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor. We would kindly ask you to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you listen, and we'd love to connect with you on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Haunted Walk. Until we meet again for Part 2, sweet dreams.